Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. So my name is Jamie Ross, and I'm the Partnership Director with UMI. We're hosting this webinar for the EM3 Growth Hub, and I just want to give you a little bit of background information on the Growth Hub, just in case you are new to these webinar series. Growth Hub is a fully funded business support service, and it provides advice, coaching, webinars, signposting to small to medium enterprises. Their mission is to help adapt, develop sustainable growth and become more productive and profitable. And all businesses at any stage of their development can access and benefit from the Enterprise M3 Growth Hub service, including support around COVID recovery and the UK transition support. So give us a shout, have a look on the website, which is the Enterprise M3 growthhub.co.uk. And there'll be all sorts of information on there as well. In addition to that, we have a specialist growth service that's targeted at businesses operating within key sectors, and they can offer business up to 2 days of free one-to-one business support and mentoring. So again, just jump onto the Enterprise M3 growthhub.co.uk for more information on that. So we've got a really interesting subject today, and I'm really thankful that we've got Sarah Callender, who's come back to do another session with us. So I'd like to introduce Sarah and welcome her today for what is going to be a very interesting subject.
I hope so, yeah. Thanks for having us again. A hot topic, I think, particularly with what's been going on in the last year, having difficult conversations, but with the added complexity of having difficult conversations virtually, like we are today. So yeah, should be a good one, Jamie.
That'll be brilliant. And just for everyone out there, if you've got any questions, which I'm sure there will be, if you just want to pop them into the Q&A section and chat, and what we'll do at certain points, we'll try and answer as many as we can. Sarah, if you're happy to field those questions, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So are you okay for me to kick off, Jamie?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, I'll be in the background lurking.
I'm just gonna share my screen, and hopefully you can see that now. So we, as Jamie said, we are going to be looking at really how to navigate difficult conversations. I'm going to be giving you some tips, some tools, and some things to think about during the course of this session. So welcome. As Jamie said, my name is Sarah Callender. This is the second one I've been doing, and I am involved and run a business called Duo Global Consulting, and we do an awful lot of work around the subject of driving strategic change, how to sort of look at change with regards to the business's culture. And we do an awful lot of stuff around this very subject, particularly with leadership teams and exec teams, and ultimately with clients too, and how to sometimes have those difficult conversations with clients. So today we're actually going to be looking at it from a couple of perspectives. So how to have them with your staff if you have a team, how to have them with clients, particularly some of the tricky stuff that we're currently trying to navigate with regards to changes in delivery and cost and pricing and that kind of thing. And then also with each other, so internally with our colleagues. So we're going to be cutting across a number of different contexts. So without further ado, we're going to dive in, and the first little bit, we're going to have a bit of fun. So this is going to be interactive, even though it's a webinar. So I want you to have a little bit of think. This is just a bit of fun to get your mindset in the right space for thinking about yourself and really what perspective do you come at difficult conversations from. So the first one is, I want you to, I'm going to time you, if you've got a piece of paper and a pen, or somewhere on your phone where you can make notes, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I'm going to time it. And I want you to think about as many uses as you possibly can for a paperclip. So I'm going to start the clock now, and I want you to write down, without thinking too much, as many ways that you can use a paperclip, and write them down, and then I want you to count them up when I say time's up. So I'm going to give you a minute, couple of minutes to think about that. If you find yourself getting a block, forget about that and just think, right, okay, if there was no ifs and buts, what would that look like? And then I want you to let me know after I say time's up, and I want you to note down on the poll that the guys have just shared what you came up with. So I'm going to give you 10 more seconds. I'm almost going to give you the countdown. Okay, so I want you to vote. Did you find between 5 and 10 uses? Did you find between 10 and 15? 15 plus might be a bit much because I didn't give you as long as I was going to, but if you did, pop in what you came up with. So how many uses did you have for a paperclip? Has the poll been launched? Can we say that? Yeah. Great. So what were the results? So most people between 5 and 10. Oh, we had 8 people who got between 10 and 15. Fantastic. And we actually got one person who must be a super quick thinker and writer, who was above 15. Okay, thanks. We can close the poll. So what I want you to think about, the reason we did that is really is thinking about most people within the 2-minute mark. Most people get between 10 and 15 answers. And really, this exercise, I've done this with lots of different groups of people before. We do it in groups, but you tend to find some people can continue writing and writing and writing and writing, and their brain doesn't start asking questions. Often people get a bit of a blockage around about sort of the 10 mark, where if you're doing it in a group, you can hear people saying, well, would that really work? And people start to put the ifs and the buts in and start to really question whether that would be the right answer. Sometimes fear kicks in where you think, well, will we sound silly if we say something that isn't right? What will other people in the group think? So it's great to see so many of you just writing things down and not really thinking too much about it. The point I want to make is there's 2 kinds of thinking. One is called divergent thinking and one is called convergent thinking. Now, this paperclip exercise was based on a study by a guy called Sir Ken Robson, and he was doing it for the Royal Society of Medicine. And it was an experiment to really explore the minds and how the minds work. And they actually do a lot of stuff. If you Google this, there's a lot of stuff in there around how children's minds work. And this was actually used, diversion and conversion thinking was used in teaching and developing teaching practices for children. But divergent thinking is really the process of coming up with new ideas and possibilities without judgment or analysis and without discussion. And that was the reason we gave you such a short time frame, so that there wasn't any scope for that. Great for creative thinking where there are no real right or wrong answers. So if I was to show you, it would be where your mind kind of thinks like that, where you don't narrow in the answers. It's just literally free thinking. Now, the second exercise I want you to do is a little riddle, and I just want you to, you can pop in the Q&A if you want your answers, but basically this is a little riddle. A box without hinges, key or a lid, yet golden treasures inside is hid. And I want you to think about, what do you think this is? What am I describing here on the slide? Has anybody got any answers? Can anybody put them, you can pop it in the chat. What do we think it is? It's a box without hinges, key or a lid, yet golden treasures inside is hid. Oh yeah, a few.
Oh God, can you see them all?
Yeah, I can see them coming through. So, okay, now you guys are quick. This is good. So, this is what sprung to mind when I got asked this question. It's ridiculous because I just thought of a box and then I thought of a dog for some reason. That's not the right answer. The right answer, which a lot of you got right, is an egg. So well done for you, for those of you who got it right. Conversion thinking is associated with analysis, judgment, and decision making. So with a riddle like that, you start to think through, and it's kind of process of elimination, and you analyze the information and you come up with an answer. Now, this conversion thinking is more where there's more of a black and white. There's a right or a wrong. And again, there's no right or wrong, whether you're conversion or diversion. You will do both. For some people in certain roles, it might require them to have more of a conversion mind, where potentially they, an accountant or a lawyer or that kind of thing, where things tend to have to be a little bit more black and white. That mindset is really, really useful. But what I want you to think about today is in relation to having difficult conversations. So when you're in a period of conflict, difficulty, where change is happening, where you're going to have a difficult conversation, what kind of mindset do you bring to the table? Is it more conversion or is it more diversion? And that's what I want you to think about as we move forward with the rest of the seminar. The key really is to flex your mindset for different situations. So where you need to and where you can is to get into the right frame of mind, right mindset, in order to drive the best outcomes that you possibly can. And that's what we're going to explore really today. So without further ado, thank you guys for your interaction. Often one of the biggest challenges we find when we work with our clients, and certainly over the last year, we have spent a lot of time working with exec teams and people who are working with their clients and suppliers, where there's been a lot of change, and it has resulted in them having to have really difficult conversations. And this is something that can either be internally, like I said, with your colleagues, with clients, or sometimes if you're having to facilitate conversations with other people, where there might be a mix of you and you're facilitating debate and discussion between a group. Now, and nobody, this subject matter, nobody is immune to this. Like, everybody has to, at some point, have a difficult conversation, whether that's at home or at work. So what I want you to do is, we're just going to put up, there's one more poll I want to get some thoughts on from the group. Which of the following difficult conversations do you find the most challenging? So we're talking about now. Now, you might say all of them, but if you had to choose one of these 5, which one are you currently finding the most difficult? Challenging colleagues when you disagree, addressing reoccurring underperformance if you have a team, the money conversation, so staff asking for a pay rise or client negotiating a discount, managing client expectations and finding it in yourself to say no, or addressing inappropriate behavior. So if you had to hazard a guess, which out of these 5 would you say do you find the most difficult? Yeah, and this is something, I mean, to be honest with you, we're going to look at pretty much all of these in some way, shape or form, but these tend to be the 5 subjects that we get brought to us as being the biggest challenge for businesses. The one around addressing underperformance, we do a lot of work with businesses around delivering good feedback, taking more of a coaching approach in the workplace, being able to drive performance by addressing sort of underperforming activities rather than leaving them. So that's often quite a big one. Can we end the poll and share the results, please? Ian, if that's okay. So the answers are in. So yeah, addressing reoccurring underperformance came out top, but a real split. So you will see that for some people, some subjects are just easier to have difficult conversations around than others. But there's a real split. But I think everybody probably will agree that those 5 are particularly difficult, and there will be many more other subjects. Thanks for that. We can close the poll. So I'm going to share with you a couple of little snippets. This is a big subject. It's a big piece of work that we tend to do, but I've got a short period of time. I'm going to give you some nuggets to take away. So the first piece of a model that we actually use with our clients is something we call fact versus story. Now, we all have absolutely fantastic imaginations, some of us better than others, And sometimes what that means is when we have to navigate a difficult conversation, particularly at the pre-conversation stage, sometimes we spin out and we start to imagine all the different outcomes that could potentially be happening or could happen if we have the conversation. And our imagination can take us off into all kinds of different scenarios. And what that means is that sometimes we lose sight of the facts of what we want to address. And before we know it, we've built a big story around the subject matter, and we end up going in, having the conversation with the story narrative running around in our head. And for some of us, it's not just one story, it's multiple stories. So the purpose of this particular piece is really around separating the facts from the story. So pre-conversation, if something has happened and you have to go and have a conversation, for example, underperformance with a team member, particularly if it's underperformance at the same level as you. So often it's easier if you're having the conversation with someone who you're managing, but if it's someone potentially in your leadership team or your exec team where performance is shown, it isn't where it should be, that can sometimes be more difficult to have that conversation. Sometimes what happens is we can find ourselves imagining there's going to be an outburst, raised voices, arguments. They said that, the email had a funny tone, so they must mean this. And particularly as we've been working virtually, this has definitely become more amplified, where we have been misinterpreting messages, emails. So some of our clients have told us that actually it's been really challenging to have this kind of conversation. We've encouraged people to still do video when you're doing it, because then you can sort of sense check some of the body language, you can pick up some of the signals. If you're doing it via email or doing it over the phone, there's a lot of that lost. So we definitely would advise to do it through video. But the fact versus story model, I'm going to play you a quick video. I want you to watch this and we'll discuss it.
Today is a good day. It's my performance review.
Wait a minute. You're excited about the performance review?
My next meeting is a one-on-one. I have to deliver a performance review.
That's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's with Matt.
Oh, I can see why you're so depressed.
Man, I'm stoked about this one, because last time Melanie gave me kind of a bad review.
Last time I gave him an extremely negative review.
What exactly did she say?
You know, mumbo-jumbo manager speak.
I couldn't have been more clear.
Like needing a little touch-up here and there.
His appearance was sloppy, he was passive and unmotivated.
Maybe learn some more stuff.
And the quality of his work was completely substandard.
And we talked about my future.
I also said that I didn't see much of a future for him.
Dude, you have to read between the lines, but she was majorly hinting that I could go places.
I don't think he's going to make it to the end of the year anyway.
With a little spit and polish, no big deal. So that's what I did. Got myself some spit and polish. Buddy, you're looking at Mr. Improved.
If anything, he's gotten worse. I don't know which is more objectionable, his social deficiencies or his technical incompetencies.
I mean, I busted my hump this last year. I even took some night classes at the community college.
I can see why you're so enthused about things.
It's more than that. I think I'll finally get that promotion I deserve. And believe me, with a new baby on the way, I could use all the cash I could get.
I'm putting Matt on probation, and that means no yearly bonus, but fortunately, I hear his wife has a good job.
Especially with my wife losing her job and all.
Sorry to hear about that, mate. Tell you what, you give me a call after the review and we'll celebrate over lunch or something.
Yay. Cheerio.
Well, call me for lunch later. I have a feeling you're going to need to take a break.
Well, Matt, are you ready?
You bet. Now, I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, I know. And maybe it's just nerves because my wife lost her job and all. But you'll see I deserve that promotion.
Promotion?
Yes. And I have you to thank. You know that little pep talk last time. And with being a new daddy and all. Anyway, I'm just so excited to hear what you have to say.
So the example really that we've just showed is really to demonstrate how pre a conversation two people can be on totally different pages. And it really does stress the importance, particularly from a performance perspective, the importance of having interim conversations, obviously, so that you don't leave the big gap between a 6-month review, for example, and there shouldn't really be any surprises at a performance review. However, this was really just to demonstrate how two people can be totally on a different page. And sometimes when you end up then finding yourself in a situation that the story that you're telling yourself about the other person can be so far from the truth. So it's really, really important to stick to the facts. So what are the facts that you know? And what did you see? What did you hear? And what did you witness? So often with the storytelling, if you go and have a conversation with someone else, like these were in the video clip, they can sometimes, the other person can end up helping you embellish the story. And before you know it, actually you've drifted into territory that didn't actually happen. And someone else can influence your narrative in your own head around what you remember. So it's really important to go back and say, okay, what are the facts? So when you're going in to have the difficult conversations, really the conversation is driven by facts rather than you making assumptions about what you think the other person either wants to hear, what they're thinking, and making sort of generalizations or sweeping judgments around the situation. If you don't have the facts, go and ask for them. So if you've been given a situation where you don't really fully understand it, instead of adding and embellishing your version of events, go back and ask the question. And this can really prevent things that can sometimes be quite small from blowing up into being a big thing, which then ends up making the conversation much more difficult than it needs to be. So go and cross-checking the facts. You sent me this, I just want to cross-check what you meant by that. Can we just jump on a quick call or a conversation, so that you're actually really sort of, and you're hearing it firsthand, not third, fourth, fifth or sixth hand. Jamie?
Yeah, so I was just going to just jump in and ask, like, how important it is as well that as an individual, or like as yourself, that your emotions have some impact, you know, because if you're personally aggrieved by something, it may result in an outcome that you wouldn't have wanted anyway. And you know, how often can that snowball it?
Absolutely. And actually it's a really good question, Jimmy, because later on in the webinar we're going to get to a piece which is a little snippet around the how do you focus on the outcome that you want to achieve? So how do you take that emotion out of it beforehand? So preparation, pre-preparation, don't make it so lengthy that the preparation is so long that you've delved into a story and made it something it's not. Do it in real time if you can, but do prepare. So, you know, this emotional intelligence piece is really important. Keep your emotions in check, but you've still got to make sure that you don't end up being super professional, that you end up alienating the person that you're talking to.
Yeah, because I think sometimes as well, it's like that even the pressure of it can be that you can't process things, you know, even as a leader, you can't process things enough. And sometimes you just want things off your desk, and it's the rush and it's the frenzy. Yeah. And I suppose it's taking that pause and developing that emotional intelligence. And
it can be polar opposites. Some people take so long that they end up, the situation has escalated to something much bigger. Some people dive in without finding out the facts, and they can actually make something bigger because they've dived in. So it's really about cross-checking it. But honestly, if you take anything from this little segment, cross-check, am I storytelling or was that fact? Is that, and I do this with sort of my business partner Laura, we often, if we're talking about a situation either with a client, about a client or a supplier, for example, we'll literally say, did that really happen? Did you see it? Did you hear it? Or did you witness it? Like, because our emotions can take over, and before we know it, and be careful about who you seek counsel from pre going into a conversation, because sometimes what happens is, especially if it's a friend, they might end up making you, you know, they'll join in and, oh yeah, wow, yeah, and before you know it, they've actually antagonized you unintentionally. They've antagonized you to feel worse or more head up or more emotional.
And actually, there was a question that's just come in, just saying, how do you keep your emotions in check, particularly if you're the recipient?
Yeah. So I'm gonna keep a hold of that question, and I'm going to come back to it, because the outcome focused piece is the next bit. This bit that we're looking at really is about is the preparation, it's the thinking. It's like, what am I telling myself? Have I gone off into a spiral? 90% of our internal dialogue, 90% of our dialogue on a daily basis is internal. We're having it with ourselves. So sometimes we can receive an email. I mean, we've probably all done it. You receive an email and you're like, what? They're asking for this at the last minute, or a deadline that's unachievable, or and we end up, sometimes sending a message, and sometimes like I'll message and draft it and then go back to it, or I'll just take a moment, go away and come back. So you keeping your emotions in check if you're the recipient, which is a good question, is, this is tough, because if you're in the moment, sometimes you can, you get the physical reaction, so the red rash, the sweaty palms, the red mist sometimes, where anger can spark. You feel upset sometimes. Like, emotion can be shown in lots of different ways. Really, it's about taking a moment. So in that moment can be in the moment, like literally, taking the deep breath, stepping back, thinking through, and thinking about what outcome do you want to achieve from this conversation.
And I suppose also added to that as well is that we have no idea what goes on in other people's lives.
Or heads. And that's exactly what that video was to demonstrate. Two total different sides of a conversation where two people had gone away. So there's lots of things you can do with performance, for example. Make sure that you have followed up an appraisal with clear actions, and you're touching base on KPIs on a regular basis. So it's not all done in the 6-month review, as it were. So there's loads of tips to make sure that conversation that we just demoed doesn't happen. But we don't know what's going on in people's personal lives. We don't know what's going on in people's sort of own narrative. Like, he thought, he'd been away and done night school, and he potentially hadn't shared that with his boss. Yeah. So it's really making sure lines of communication are open, that you're talking about the facts. If you don't know, you're going and cross-checking it. And more importantly, let's focus on what is people's best intention. Like, if you automatically jump to the worst intention, which is sometimes where we naturally fall, like, they just want me out, they want to promote someone else, they've never liked me. If we fall into the negative sort of intention, we literally can spiral so quickly. Yeah. So stopping and thinking, what could be this person's best intention? So this has happened a lot with us, and what we've seen with clients, where for example, during the first lockdown, and even in more recent times, where people have assumed clients don't need their services anymore, or that they're not going to be able to afford them, or where they've kind of had a narration around the client relationship because they haven't been in touch, they've not returned my emails, and before we know it, we have literally made a story up about our client, and we haven't cross-checked it. Picking up the phone and getting to the answer, sometimes it takes quite a bit of gumption, because the fear can drive your behavior. Like the fear of them saying, actually, we haven't got the money to pay for the contract this month, or we're going to have to pause it, and your storytelling, you actually end up feeling your worst fear before you've even had the conversation.
Yeah, and so in many ways, sometimes it pays, just get out of your own head.
Get out of your own head and actually go and have that conversation. So have it in real time when it hasn't escalated is a big one. But I'll come back to that question when we come on to the next section, because I think I'll be able to answer it in a bit more detail. So really, the question that I want you to ask yourselves is, when you're thinking about having a difficult conversation, or there is a situation that requires you to, where is the gap in understanding between the fact versus the story? So we want to bridge the gap. Like we want to make sure that we're sticking to the facts, and that there isn't, we're not spiraling into the storytelling. So these will all ladder through. So I'm going to move on to the next bit. There's something called a reflection loop. What that, I've just been describing it really. It's where we get in our own head and we go round and round and round. I often describe our minds as a bit like us playing a video. So if you're not careful, you can play a video or a story or a narrative on loop. So literally it's like it just keeps going, repeat, repeat. And we can tell ourselves the same thing over and over and over again. And before we know it, we believe that that's the truth. So we have to be super careful about being conscious of stepping out of the reflection loop. Sometimes this is super useful if someone else can do it for you. So someone going and having a conversation with someone else, we call it like an interruption of thought. So it's like, how do you interrupt your own head space, as Jamie just mentioned, and asking yourself, what do I need to do now to move to the best solution? Not to get to the end of the conversation. So if you're going to go into a conversation, really be clear about what the best outcome could be in your own head, and make sure that the stuff you're saying gets you closer to that, not further away. So really the interruption, like that can either be you interrupting yourself, like I'm going to go for a walk, I need to take a break from the computer, I need to go and have a conversation with someone else, whatever it might be, but it's an interruption. It's a very polite interruption. I don't like using that word because sometimes it sounds like I mean interrupt people, which in my mind is rude, but it's about interrupting yourself or being conscious to interrupt other people. If you see your colleagues and it's more difficult when we're working virtually, but if you know people are stuck in their own head, pick the phone up, say, let's have a chat, I'll chat it through with you. Or, you know, ask them the question, is that definitely fact, or did you see, hear, or witness it? So that interruption can be so critical so that people can kind of take stock and think more logically. So that's fact versus story. The next bit I want to look at is, this is a little word, but it has a huge impact on when we're having difficult conversations, and it is the word why. So make a note of this if you can, because honestly, this was one of the things that I learned a few years ago that literally changed the way that I phrase conversations with people. So one thing I didn't say is that one of the things that Duo does do, Laura and I are both behavioural change coaches, so we are interested in people linguistically and their body language, and that kind of forms a lot of the stuff that we talk about. But really, the why question is so interesting, and you can see the reaction when you ask a why question in body language and the way people linguistically respond back to you in a conversation. So it's a small word. The impact it can have is huge. There is books written about the 5 whys. There's lots of people say, you know, ask questions, get to the root cause. What I'm not saying is don't ask questions. What I am saying is, in our experience, that the word why can often start a conversation from a negative standpoint. So it can send people into a kind of almost a defense mode. It usually takes people back in their past. So I'll give you an example. Jamie, would you mind joining on just so I can have this conversation with you? So if I was talking to Jamie and I said to Jamie, so imagine Jamie's my, he works for me. And I said to Jamie, Jamie, why didn't you hit your deadlines last week? See Jamie's face? Jamie's literally gonna start to think about all the things he didn't do last month and what were the reasons behind him not hitting his deadline. And it's highly like, it doesn't matter how nice I ask it, even if I said, why didn't you hit your target last month? Why didn't you hit the deadlines? Even if I say it nicer in a more friendly tone, he will still go back and start to give me all of the reasons he feels like he didn't hit the deadline. It can instigate defensive behavior. So you're having a difficult conversation. The outcome I want to achieve is to get Jamie to hit his deadline this month. But if I start to ask the whys and I'm really like, you know, push him on it, he will start to go backwards rather than forwards. So if I said to you, Jamie, imagine, you weren't, but imagine, why were you late this morning? You said you'd be on the call at 1:45, why were you late?
My dog ran away.
He's probably going to do one of two things: make excuses, and sometimes there'll be white lies. The dog didn't turn up, or I
don't have a dog.
Well, yeah. Or he's going to start to feel like I'm questioning like his integrity. Or now you might say, well, he deserved it. He didn't turn up on time. The outcome I want is in the future that he turns up when he says he does. So when you ask the question, if you're going into a difficult conversation, and I want to have a difficult conversation with Jamie about targets, like say sales targets, for example, I want him this month to hit his target. I don't want him to just feel like he's defeated. Actually, all I've done is question him about last month. I still need the answers, but I'm going to ask them with a what or a how or a where. So I'm going to say to him, how can we make this month count? What can we do different to last month? Where are we at now? What's your thoughts on the target this month? How can we make sure that this month is the month that we hit it? So it takes him forward. And it sounds silly, but in a timeline, if you take someone backwards in their past, retrieving information from the past, they might get stuck in that spot. We don't want them stuck in that spot. We want them moving forward. We want them to have an eye on the prize moving forward. So your language and the way that you tackle the difficult conversation really counts.
And do you know what, Sarah, there was an interesting element to that as well, is that immediately by asking your what, hows and wheres, it felt that you're alongside me rather than being this authoritarian figure that's like, what? And you just immediately get defensive because you could be more knowledgeable than your senior.
And you know, when it's, say you'd underperformed for 3 months and I was having to have a really stiff conversation, it doesn't mean we're taking joint ownership. You're still taking ownership. I'm not taking it for you. I'm still asking you, what do you need to do? Now, how can we change that to make it happen this month? I'm still giving you ownership. I'm challenging you, but I'm not making you start with defense mode.
And actually also it could help with the dialogue about what support do you need from me in order to help you? Potentially. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for that. It's just easier for me to do that if I have a person to look at. But it's really, this is the same if you are having a conversation with a client. If you go and start asking the client the why, your client will go defensive. It is subconscious behavior sometimes that is driven. So really, this is a throw-in. It's a little added extra, but if you can think about how you challenge and question and what language you use, you will drive better outcomes for sure. And that does not mean you can't be challenging, but we do want to get to solutions, not to sit and dwell. So, but you'll notice with the why, the what and the how questions, I'm still reflecting on what might not have gone well and what we might need to do in the future to move forward, to change. So it's not being dismissive, and it's not about not learning from the past mistakes. We absolutely still need to do that, but we need to do it in a way that takes people forward. A lot of conflict comes from the result of people feeling like they need to be defensive. So the emotions will rise. So to the question, the point that was raised in the question was around, sometimes our emotions rise when we feel like we're being questioned or people are being accusational. And often it's not even intentional, but it can drive us to start to behave in a way that isn't conducive. So that's the why question. Really thinking about the what, the how, and the where as alternative words. The next little piece I want you to think about is speaking to people's motivations. I'm just going to play a short clip from a video, and I want you to think about, when you're talking to people, are you considering what motivates them? Or are you thinking about yourself and what you need to get off your chest? To really influence someone in a difficult conversation, it is critical you think about what motivates them, because then they will take action. So I'm going to play a short clip from a film called The Blind Side. Just watch the difference between the impact of talking to someone from your standpoint and what you think they need to hear, and what actually plays to their motivation.
Holding, left tackle.
Michael, come on.
Or. Holding inside here between the tits. You got it? Look at me, son. If you grab them outside here like this with that horse collar thing you just did, you're going to get flagged and I'm going to be pissed. You hear me? All right, let's go.
my stuff, all right?
Okay.
They still look good coming off the bus. Terrified till they realize he's a marshmallow. Looks like Tarzan plays like Jane.
Give me a minute, Bert.
We're in the middle of practice, Leanne.
You can thank me later. Michael, you remember when we first met and we went to that horrible part of town to buy those dreadful clothes? And I was a little bit scared and you told me not to worry about it because you had my back. Do you remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
And if anyone tried to get to me, you would have stopped them, right? And when you and SJ were in that car wreck, what did you do to the airbag?
Stopped it.
You stopped it. You stopped it. This team is your family, Michael. You have to protect them from those guys, okay? Listen. Tony here's your quarterback, all right? You protect his blind side. When you look at him, you think of me, how you have my back, how you have his, okay? All right, Tony, go back. Uncle Lumpy here is your tailback. When you look at him, you think of SJ and how you've never let anyone or anything hurt him. You understand me? All right, go back. Got it?
What about Collins and Mr. Tootie?
Fine, they can be on the team too. Are you going to protect the family, Michael?
Yes, ma'am.
Good boy. And go have some fun. Yelling at him doesn't work, Bert. Doesn't trust men. His experience, they pretend to care about you until they disappear.
Wanna run a play?
You're going to want to get this.
Okay.
Come on. All right, Michael, come on. Woo! Yes! Michael!
All right, way to go, Al. Way to go.
That boy.
Okay. What'd you say to him?
You should get to know your players, Bert. He tested 98% in protective instincts. I said you could thank me later. It's later, Bert.
So the really important piece to take away from that is that if you can influence and talk to whoever it is, a client, a colleague, a team member, a supplier, if you can talk to them in a way that will motivate them, that appeals to what really makes them motivated, you will get way better results. And there's a big piece around assessing people's motivations, and we look at that. We can help people sort of establish what really motivates someone, what makes them shine and light up, what makes them want to do something. You know, for some people, it's definitely linking an outcome to achievement, to financial gain, to hitting a target, hitting a KPI. For other people, that doesn't motivate them in the same way. They would be more motivated by knowing about the impact they're having on a team, or the growth of a project, or contributing to a collective, collaborative approach. So really, you know, thinking about what motivates the people that you're having the conversations with, and establishing that, you can then have the conversation in association with them rather than with yourself. So tailoring your communication and your feedback to their motivation. Ask for what you need to ask for yourself, like, what do I need that to motivate me? What would I need to hear? So, you know, really thinking about that before you go into the conversation. This is particularly great when you're looking at reviewing projects and things on maybe going on track for a client delivery, and getting the person to think about what will motivate them in order for them to achieve the results you need them to achieve. Particularly, I use this a lot with regards to clients. I think about what's their key drivers, what are their motivations, what do they talk about the most, what makes them light up when they speak to you, and you linking your communication to that, and it will categorically change the way that they then respond back to you. So it's a big piece, the motivation piece. I wanted to put a little bit in here today because it's so integral. We will naturally default to what motivates us rather than what motivates the other person. And if you're in a leadership position and you're quite divergent in the way that you think, you might convergent, sorry, in the way that you think, you might think, well, it's this way, it's not that way, and that's what I'm going to tell them. If you go in with that frame of mind, then sometimes you won't drive the outcomes that you want. So it's a really important piece. I think this particularly, it's super useful if you're having to have a difficult conversation with a group. Think about how can you motivate the group to take the information you want to give them to move forward. This has been a big one with regards to dealing with change and communicating big pieces of change over the last year to teams, big groups, to clients. So that's thinking about motivation. And finally, I'm going to give you a little exercise, and this is a little equation called the R factor. It's called the response factor, and this one will hopefully answer the question that was in the chat box earlier as well. So if you imagine events, situations, you know, that require us to have difficult conversations will come and go all day long. We can't control the event. That's the E. We can't control events. They come, they go, we get fastballed every day. It's how we respond to the event that is actually the bit that we can control. So if you're, imagine there's something happened, there's a big piece happened, and you're going to have to go to a client and have a really difficult conversation with them about a project not going to hit a deadline, for example. If the event comes in, you have a choice. You can either react, which often is driven by emotion. We don't think, we're not thinking about the outcome. We're thinking about how this might impact me or the business, and you might react to the client. If you react, you are increasing the chances of the other person reacting. What I mean by react is it's like where it's literally autopilot. You're not thinking about it. You literally dive straight in and you react. And sometimes it can be driven by emotion or even ego, where you're thinking about how something has impacted you. If you can press pause, even if it's a small pause, and think, gather your thoughts, and then respond, you will increase the chances of the other person giving you a more thought through response back. And that will usually take you closer to a more positive outcome. If you react and they react back, before you know it, you've lost sight of the outcome and you're just having a conversation or conflict about the situation, the event. You couldn't control the event in most cases. So thinking about, I mean, it's such a simple little equation to remember, jot it down somewhere. I use this a lot. The E plus the R equals the O. The event comes in, you can't control that piece. You can't control the outcome. The bit you can control is your R, is the response to the event. And one thing that often we think we can control is other people's responses. You can't. You can never control the way someone else will receive information and respond back. We sit and we think about it, we can influence it and we can prepare well. But if you stick to the facts, if you don't know the facts, you ask for them. If you respond in a way that drives you closer to the outcome, so you talk about what the outcome is, what outcome do we want? You appeal to the motivations of the person you're having the conversation with. So their motivation might be to get a certain outcome. You talk about the outcome. You will keep the other person more focused and think more divergently. They'll think more broadly, more open-minded to drive the outcome you need to achieve. if you dive in and you react, it's highly likely the other person will react back emotionally. And a really great cross-check is my response going to take me closer or further away from the outcome that I want to achieve? When we're responding emotionally, it can be, we dive in without even thinking, and before we know it, our emotion is super visible, and it can cause an emotional reaction from the other person too. I'm just looking at that question. What is the best way of controlling one's response when feeling threatened? I mean, a really good question. For me, you know, oh gosh, there's so much stuff I could tell you. If you can prepare yourself to go into a difficult conversation on an equal, this is something that like is so important. If, for example, I was to go in and have a conversation, often with clients, for example, we put the client on a pedestal, unknowingly sometimes. The client's the client, they pay the money, they're on a pedestal. So we metaphorically go into a conversation with them higher than us. My advice would be to absolutely go in on an equal. So prepare pre-conversation. I'm an equal. This person's just another person, regardless of who they are. They're another person. They will feel that. Even when facing one's boss, like they're just another person. And sometimes, yes, if you feel threatened, for example, it can, what we do. So if I was to demonstrate this, Jamie, can I borrow you for a second, just quickly? So if I'm going to have a conversation with Jamie, imagine Jamie's my boss. And I, in my head, make him much bigger than me, metaphorically. He's the big boss. People even say big boss, the big boss, not the small boss, the big boss. If I go in and have a conversation with Jamie, it's harder to do this, but, and I make myself really small and I'm looking up at Jamie and I'm saying, okay, Jamie, yeah, he will feel he has the upper hand. You'll just feel it. And in my mind, it doesn't matter. Like a boss might be the boss of the business, but they don't have the upper hand over a conversation we're about to have. Like I want to go in on an equal. That mindset for the conversation is so important. If I go in above him, trying to inflate myself and I'm going to have this out with him, then he will feel that too. And the likelihood is they might flare. If I go in equal to Jamie and I've prepared in my head, like this is just, it's another person, I want to go in, I'm focused on my outcome, it will help you control the emotion that you're feeling. And actually, they will sense it, that you've gone in on an equal. It's so important. When we do sort of client-facing training with people around behaviours and how you approach them, this is the big piece, because so often we put people in authority, people, stakeholders, for example, we put them on such a pedestal in our own head that it impacts the way we communicate with them. And it often impacts it negatively. So you have to be authentic. You have to go in with your authentic self, like, you know, being respectful and polite and appreciating people's experience for sure. But going in on that equal is so important. And when you feel threatened, you know, buy yourself some time. You know, sometimes you do have to say, listen, you know, someone started raising their voice to me, for example, I would just say, listen, it's feeling like you're starting to get a little bit agitated here. This might not be the right environment. Like, why don't we take a moment and we'll come back and address this? Like, even if they're your boss, even if they're a client, for me, you can still make a choice as to whether you want to sit and have that conversation. Because if you leave it so late that your emotions are already exposed and you're feeling the adrenaline's pumping through, the likelihood is it's gonna turn into negative conflict, not productive conflict. That makes sense. Yeah. So that demo didn't work very well, but if I was in a room with you, Jamie, I would literally have sat on the floor underneath you, and then I would have stood above you, and then I would come equal. It feels really strange when you do it in person, but for some reason we do it in our own head, and we just do. And there's another question in there. What if you are in a hierarchical organization with a toxic culture? Difficult to be authentic in that situation. It's tricky. For me, you know, that is difficult. If toxic culture, that's a strong description. What I would say is, if you're deciding to stay in that organization, don't ever give up on influence and change for the better, because sometimes it can be a couple of people who are driving that, and you know, hierarchy doesn't mean that people aren't equal as in a conversation. Like, you've got to have leaders, you've got to have, often in a business, you've got to have structure from a leadership perspective, so people know who's doing what, and accountability. But for me, that doesn't mean people don't have a voice. You know, everybody should be able to input into the culture. It's really difficult for me to answer that question, because that's like, it's such a big piece, you know, one person in driving change, but never give up on raising the challenges, raising the better solutions, I would say.
Yeah, I think so also as well, because I mean, I've my own personal sort of feelings on all of this, but it's one of those things that, you know, you can approach and say, yeah, that sounds amazing, but actually it's like exercise. It takes time, you know, to apply and to learn, and it's just knowing that sometimes it's got, okay, I didn't quite get that right, but next time, you know, it's that reflection and learning and keeping going, and it can't happen with a click of a finger.
Yeah, there's a good question. It's anonymous, but the question is really around, what if the person you're having the difficult conversation with keeps crying? Crying is just one of the emotions that can often arise. So like, it's really interesting. We had this with a client recently where they said, actually, people are just feeling way more emotional because of the COVID situation, and emotions are high, and there was a lot more people getting emotional during like one-to-one discussions and things. What we actually did was we did some training that collectively sort of talk to people, raise the issue as a group. So we jumped on a training session with the wider business and said, listen, we know people are feeling more emotional, and potentially, and we actually looked at sort of etiquette around the working environment. And actually, we're not saying people can't get upset, but to really pick and, you know, be if you've got personal issues, to choose your time and things like that, but also to prepare the other person. Like, you've got to create a trusted environment for people. Like, sometimes people can just get emotional. Press and pause and saying, right, you seem to be getting emotional, I'm going to give you a moment to get yourself together, and I'll come back. To not just let that escalate, because nobody wants to be upset in front of anybody else. Like, it's not something you want to happen. Sometimes emotions take over, and it does. I'm just conscious of time. I know there was a lot to get through. Hopefully that's given some food for thought, really. There's lots of tools and techniques outside of what I've discussed. I've just kind of given you some hints, but fact versus story, thinking about the why question and rephrasing that, thinking about how you have conversations in relation to people's motivations, and then really thinking about that R factor. I think we're going to share the slides so you can take some of the information from the slides if you so wish. But obviously my details are on there. If anybody does have any further questions or want to reach out, then feel free to do so offline. That's perfect.
No, that's so good. Thank you so much, Sarah, because there is a heck of a lot to absorb and take in there, and I do encourage everyone to try and reach out to Sarah. In addition to that, we'll also have the webinar on the Enterprise M3 Growth Hub YouTube channel, and you can access it through the website as well. But you know, there is a lot of information, so just let us know if you need any further support, or if you're interested in contacting Sarah. The details are there, but we can follow that up as well, because it's an important topic for our time. But thank you so much. Honestly, it was really good having you back again. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was brilliant, and I hope everyone else did. So just want to thank all the audience as well for sticking with us throughout it all. I know it was super interesting, and thanks for joining us across the webinar series. Take care, all the very best, and
thanks, everybody.
have a good rest of the year. Cheers now.